Okay, so as you come in, if you haven't already, please leave your problem sets over there. Today, we're going to move beyond market equilibrium and start to think about policies, which will sort of be the rest of the course. So the rest of the course will be about policy analysis, and that will start by thinking about sort of the most fundamental area of policy, which is externalities. So I'm going to start by talking about the idea of an externality and try to contrast it with some of the notions you may have learned, say, in your introductory courses about what an externality is. I'll talk about policies to solve externalities and how Pagu's principle urges us to focus on addressing exactly the distortion that takes place and not other related things. I'll then try to help you clarify the idea of an externality by talking about some things that are maybe surprising that are externalities and some surprising things that are not externalities but you might think would be. So we'll talk about pecuniary externalities and the notion of internalities. We'll then talk about public policy solutions to externalities, and we'll focus on three areas: Paguvian taxes, the legal system, and cap and trade, which is basically putting a maximum on the amount of some activity that can take place, but allowing people to trade the right to do that activity. And we'll talk about the trade-offs between these different approaches. We'll then talk about Stigler's Coase theorem and purely private solutions to externality problems. How with property rights, parties might be able to bargain to efficiency. And I'll talk about why in some cases this or other private solutions may work, but I'll mostly emphasize the flaws in the Coase theorem and the ways in which it ignores the importance of information, and that will motivate the next lecture on Thursday. Okay. So, is Victor here? No? Anyone else want to give a basic summary of why we found that the market mechanism worked so well in the last class? Yeah, Asta.
Basically because it provides better information on people's wants and so on and so forth than any other alternative system.
Mm-hmm. And in particular, it forces you to pay for all of the consequences of your action. It conveys a bunch of prices to people, and those prices force people to pay for everything that they take away and rewards them for everything that they give, right? So if I want to eat more fancy dinners, I have to pay for that because that means somebody else won't be able to eat those fancy dinners. And what I pay is the opportunity cost to other people of those dinners, the price that somebody else would be willing to pay to get the same service. If I do a job, I get paid for what that job produces for other people. That's my wage. So in all these areas, I get paid or pay what I give to or receive from other people. And this principle is called payments in accordance with product. And any time this fails to happen, we say that an externality exists. And the reason that we call it an externality is not because it affects another person. Notice that in all these areas that we talked about, you were affecting other people, but you were getting paid for it, or you were being paid for it, or you were paying for it. But if you affect other people, or really anything, in a way that's external to the price system, that's an externality. So externality are effects external to the price system, not effects on other people, right? So, Tanner, can you give me some examples of externalities?
Being really loud in your dorm at night when people are trying to study.
Yeah, that's a classic example. Any others you can think of?
Having the campus here, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's actually paid for that.
Yeah, so it might affect other people who don't pay anything.
The residents of Hyde Park. They don't
sure. Playing loud music, beautiful building that people like to look at, pollution is a negative externality. Generating new ideas is a positive externality because usually most of those people won't pay you for those ideas. Crime is a negative externality because you're not forced to pay unless you have a fine or something like that for the consequences of the criminal activity. Yeah, Austin.
Speaking of generating new ideas, you know how inventions are like patentable but business processes are not?
Yep.
Is there any is there any evidence, or were there any situations in history where business processes were basically had patent rights around them? So we're reading like the joint stock company was supposed to be extremely important, but obviously you couldn't capture the benefits as well.
So, I mean, I don't think that patents are the only way that people can capture the rents associated with a unique idea they come up with. Patents are one very important way, but there are other forms of intellectual property. There are trade secrets. There are, just the fact that you know how to do something better than anybody else. There's the fact that people want to buy from the originator of the idea. So if you get famous for the idea, you can get some rents associated with that. So all of these ways of trying to allow people to appropriate the value of ideas have flaws, because they all create various distortions or are incomplete. And when we come to the lecture on intellectual property, there will be a lot of questions about trying to balance the benefits and costs of different ways of rewarding innovations. And we'll talk through those. Okay, so a simple example of something that generates an externality is smoking. So I want to go through simple analysis of that. So imagine that there are 100,000 people in downtown Chicago each day, and that 10% of them are smokers. And that to each person who's a smoker, it's worth $3 minus times the number that they smoke, that's the utility they get, minus the square of the amount that they smoke divided by 10. And imagine that cigarette prices are naturally $1 before we put any taxes on it. Yeah, Mike.
Could you say something about how the value of smoking S is calculated? Or like how you got to...
Okay, no, I'm just making this up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, what was
Yeah, I'm just making this up.
What was the S square over 10? 3S was its utility.
So this is all utility. But the point is that, the marginal utility of an additional cigarette declines as you have more cigarettes. Okay, so if this is the situation, Joan, how much are smokers going to smoke?
You want marginal cost to be equal to marginal utility.
Yeah.
So you find the derivative of 3s minus s squared.
And what is that?
3 minus 2s over 10 to 5s, and we equate that to 1.
1/5 s, right? Oh, sorry.
To $1. And then you find
Yeah.
s.
So what do you get?
Um,
Can you do it on the board or on your paper?
S equals 10.
Yep, exactly. Very nice, Joan. So let's imagine that the other 90% of people get disutility of 1/100,000th dollars for each cigarette that's smoked. What would then be the socially optimal amount of smoking, Tanner?
So you take you subtract you do the same thing you just did with that added cost. So
Yeah. So what's the added cost for each cigarette smoked?
Negative 1 over 100,000 times that by 90.
90,000, right?
90,000, yeah.
Yeah, so that's 9/10, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the So it would be 5.5.
Yes,
Because it's 1.1 times 5.
exactly. So, so now the optimal is 5.5 cigarettes per person rather than 10. Right? So one way that you can look at this, I'll show you how to draw it. Is that, here was the private demand for cigarettes, at a price of $1, people smoke 10, but if we add an additional 90 cents to that, we get here, right? Which is 5.5. So the fundamental social problem is that smokers don't have to pay for the harms that are created by their smoking, and we're going to talk today about various ways of making them do that, right? Now, more generally, if people are different, we have to try to maximize total welfare and take into account the total externality, which means adding up across all of the different people how much each one of them is affected by the externality. And this leads to Pagu's principle of payments in accordance with product. People have to pay the average externality of their actions multiplied by the number of people affected, right? And that's not just economics, that's sort of common sense. We think that people should have to pay for the consequences of their actions on other people, right? And markets make you do this for many things, but externalities focus on cases where markets are missing. And those tend to be cases, as we'll talk even more about in the next class, where the harms or benefits that you bring by your action are spread over many people. When I'm just buying a good from you, the cost of that good is just a cost that accrues to you who sells it to me, right? You have to give up the good in order to give it to me. But for things where there are externalities, those tend to be in areas where, like smoking, many people get a little bit of harm from you smoking, and therefore it's hard for you to pay those people for the right to smoke, right? So the solution to externality problems is to focus on the absence of that price and try to figure out what that price should be that smokers should have to pay. And in particular, you don't want to just indirectly get at the problem if you can get directly at the relevant missing price. So like in principle, you could just make, for example, cigarette cases expensive, or you could ban cigarette cases. Well, that might reduce the amount of smoking, but it doesn't get directly at the problem, and therefore it will cause other distortions, right? So let me give you a contrast to this. So typically when you hear people in macroeconomics talking about fiscal policy, they say, oh, we want people to spend more, so let's just hand out money, or let's just build a project and then people will get money and they'll spend it. But that doesn't get directly at the problem, right? The direct problem is that people aren't spending enough. So rather than just giving them money and hoping they spend it, you should probably give them money if they spend it by reducing sales taxes or subsidizing the purchases of goods. That would be the more Pigouvian answer to that problem. So you see that even within economics, there's a lack of sometimes understanding of Pigou's principle that you should try to target exactly the things that are causing the problem. Okay, so now let's talk about something which might seem to be an externality, and we'll have to think about whether it really is. So imagine that I discover a giant hoard of gold, and the prices on gold fall. And this hurts people who currently own gold because their gold is now worth less, right? Is this an externality? Again, is Victor here? No? Anybody else want to venture an opinion about that? Yeah, remind me of your name.
Tavish.
Tavish.
Well, anyone who people that already own the gold get less money for it, but those who are buying it would spend less?
Exactly. So because this is mediated through the price system, right, there's an offsetting benefit accompanying the cost. While people who currently own gold are worse off, people who could potentially acquire gold are better off, right? And because this is mediated through the price system, there is no net loss to society associated with you finding gold. So unlike a real externality, there's no efficiency loss here. And therefore we should not penalize people for creating pecuniary externality. And in fact, some of the most common misapplications of the theory of externalities are to these types of pecuniary externalities, because people often mistake any effect I have on another person for a real externality. So for example, imagine that a competing firm enters an industry and lowers the prices that all the firms get for their goods. You could say, well, that's an externality. But that's not really an externality because it's going to benefit the consumers as much as it harms the firms. Now let me give you another case. Suppose that that firm enters the industry and it doesn't actually reduce the prices. All it does is take away some of the sales that are currently being made by existing firms. Is that an externality? Suel, what do you think?
I don't think so, because whatever surplus the consumer would be getting, that firm gets it instead. So, well, actually, sorry, if you're looking at it from the firm's point of view.
So I come into the industry, prices don't fall at all. Firms are making positive profits on every unit they sell, and I just steal some of the business away from one of the other firms.
That's an externality, because you're out of the picture. You're like everybody else who's not involved in that transaction is being negatively affected.
Exactly, that's right. Mike, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Free trade with China might cause steel workers to lose their jobs, but that's not really a real externality if the price of labor is just falling as a result of that. Polluting a lake could harm consumers because the price of fish, because there were fish in that lake, the price of fish could fall, or rise, sorry, because there's not as many fish. But that would benefit the producers of other fish, right? Because they would experience a rise in price of their fish. Now, of course, polluting the lake does have to have some externality on someone, right? You're destroying something. So the question is, who is the real victim of the externality? Mike Fosco?
The consumers for health benefits from the fish, or probably, or health trade-offs, because they're probably not the healthiest. You could view it like that.
But you're destroying some fish, right? So the question is, who's the direct victim?
The fish would be because they're dying.
Well, we don't usually think of fish as agents in our models.
The farmers are getting a lower surplus of fish to use due to this pollution that the firm is not paying for.
The question is, who owns the fish, right? If someone owns the right to fishing in that lake, then whoever owns that right is the one who's the victim of the externality. If no one owns the right to fishing in the lake, but de facto there's a bunch of people who go and fish it, it's the people who are extracting those fish from the lake who are harmed, right? So it's whoever is the de facto owner of the right to fish those fish. Yeah, Philip.
Doesn't where the harm falls depend a lot on the elasticities? Like if fish is sufficiently, like the demand for fish is sufficiently inelastic, like there might be a large increase in price for even a relatively small drop on quantity.
Well, but that only affects how the pecuniary effects are divided, but it has no effect on the real effect of the externality.
All right.
Yeah, Evan.
So would the fishermen be said to be harmed by this? It's they're the ones with the de facto right.
Well, if they have the de facto right, but if someone else owns the right to the fish, but they sell a license to the fisherman, then whoever owns the right to the fish will have it.
So why are consumers not considered to be harmed by it?
Because they are just buying the fish in the marketplace. They're just like the people who would, buy the permits to fish. They're just someone who's down the road who's affected only via the price system and not directly by the destruction of the property. Yeah. Tanner.
But there are some people who are like, not just price externality, there are some real externalities in the system, right? If people enjoy fishing at the lake, that would be...
If people get some pleasure out of fishing at the lake and they don't pay an entrance fee for that, yes, that's right. So that's what the key is. Is there a price that's capturing things? If there's a price that's capturing things, then it's not an externality. But if there's not a price that captures the way in which the harm is transferred, then there probably is an externality. Okay. Another example of this is, imagine you have a brilliant roommate who usually breaks the curve but got stoned last night, right? So you could think that creates a positive externality on everyone in the class. But that's actually not right, because it's pecuniary. Basically how valuable the grade is like a price, right? And so even though that guy is benefiting everyone in the class, it's hurting by an equal amount everybody else at the university, because now the perception among the broader world is going to be that people from the university for a given grade are less smart. Even though that's tiny effect, right? It's spread over a large number of people, and those exactly balance each other. Yeah, Austin.
How do frictions fit into this?
What?
How do frictions fit into this? Because I feel like,
Imperfections in the market?
yeah.
Well, I mean, the example that I gave of like coming into a market where there's market power and therefore firms are earning a positive markup and stealing some of the goods from another firm, that's one example of a model with frictions where we can divide things into real and pecuniary effects.
It just seems like for this last one, for instance, because university reputations are durable over hundreds of years in many cases, that like, even though technically.
But in the very long term, it will have a very, very small effect on a large, large number of people, right? So another example of this is like in China and East Asia, there's often a lot of selective abortions of women. And you could say that this makes the women, but other women better off because they have less women to compete with for the men in the society. So maybe that brings them an externality. But the men have fewer women that they get. And so effectively, there's like a price in the in the marriage market that is equilibrating. And that means that this has offsetting effects on the two sides and therefore is a pecuniary externality. So even when it's not a literal market, there can be price-like mechanisms when there's competitive things going on. Yeah, Philip. Oh, sorry, yeah, Dake.
If you go back to the example of the firm entering a market and using market power,
Yeah.
doesn't that firm benefit from the loss of other firms, and don't those two equal out? Why is it still considered?
Oh, but I mean, if I steal a computer from you, I benefit and you lose by the same amount, right? So that's, if we didn't call that an externality, nothing would be an externality, right? The fact that I benefit can't possibly be an offsetting thing in an externality for me doing damage to you, right? It has to be offsetting effects to people other than me, right? Remind me of your name. Sorry.
Mitch.
Mitch, yeah.
Does that basically mean that like in order for there to be an externality, say in the case of stealing a computer,
Yep.
the marginal benefit to you has to be somehow, let's say, less than the marginal cost of losing a computer, say, to some guy
No,
who has
that
20 computers to run.
no. That's exactly what I said to Dake is not true. It's always causes an externality if I hurt on net people other than myself.
Right, but I'm saying, what if it doesn't equalize such that you get the benefit of a computer, but say
You don't count my benefit at all when computing externalities. That's the key point. You
Just-
only affect the effects on all people other than you. So if it has offsetting effects on people other than you, then it's not a real externality. But if it has a benefit, cost to you and a benefit to me, that is an externality. So you can only, when doing these offsetting things, think about effects to people other than myself.
I guess what I'm asking is whether the offset has to be equal in order for you to say that there's no externality.
Yes, the offset has to be equal.
So if the offset is not equal, then there is an externality,
Yes.
or not necessarily?
Yes, there is. And the price system ensures that things are perfectly offsetting. That's the idea. Yeah, Philip.
Would there be other externality effects? Let's say when a firm enters and lowers the price, would there be an externality experienced on the extra units if demand increased? So like consumers
Yes,
gain, society gains a net.
So if the price goes down, which is the only time when the total number of units will increase, that can create an externality if there's currently market power in the industry, because the market power is effectively an unpriced externality that exists before.
And the reverse happens if fish sales go down because of the price of fish rising, right?
No, because it's only true if the market for fish is not competitive. So what I said is only true if there's an imperfectly competitive market.
Okay.
But if the market is perfect competition, then the effects perfectly offset.
And for the selective abortion
Yeah.
case, there could still be like an externality due to selective abortion because people prefer being in a society with an even ratio so everyone can marry instead of a society with a highly skewed ratio, which leaves some people unmarried because like men or women run out, right?
Yeah, but I mean, that's sort of not a directional effect. It's like one that's about whether you're at the tipping point or not. You know what I mean? Like, you see what I'm saying? I mean, again, that's it's like the market power thing that you were saying before. if like the market for men is more concentrated than for women, then on average men will have like a little bit more market power. Or if there's fewer women, then women will have a little bit more market power. And yes, there will be a little externality that comes from reducing that market power, but not one that comes just from the, like if it was perfectly balanced, one man disappearing would have exactly balancing effects. That's the idea.
Well, is this assuming infinitely large population? Because if in a finite population, one man disappearing implies one woman.
It doesn't assume infinitely large. The effects will be very close to what I said if it's finite.
So then it'll, like the real externality would just be one woman can't be married.
Yeah, but that one woman is going to be like way down the desirability charts, right? And so she, like her opting out is not going to have much like net harm. I mean, that's basically what it comes to. Yeah. Did anyone else have a question? Yeah, Rishi?
So really quickly, in the case of the firm, again,
Yeah.
which comes in and takes away competition, that's only an externality if there's market power in that industry?
Yeah, because then I'm taking away profits that another firm is earning.
If it's perfectly competitive, then it
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Austin.
This is kind of random.
Yeah.
Just going off how
Yeah.
much evidence is there that the marriage market is actually ordinally ranked?
Okay, there's a lot to be done about. You can read Pierre Andre Chiappari's work on this. He's been working on this recently. I don't want to get into it. It's very complicated. But it's clear that there's multidimensional heterogeneity and multidimensional matching, and that it's not just one-to-one ranking. But all those different attributes can be priced, and so you can still get the same sort of effect. Yeah, Joan.
Intent doesn't have anything to do with it, right? Like, suppose you have someone who
No.
is extremely phobic.
Externalities is completely invariant to intent. We'll talk about intent later, actually, but we're completely invariant to intent. So, like, even in fact, even if like you could never have foreseen what you were doing, you still, if you had any causal role in it, can be thought to create an externality.
Marginal benefit
Yeah.
still, like this is roughly the same thing, which was asking,
Yeah.
but like Robin Hood, every time he
Yeah.
takes from like rich people and gets to poor people, like
Yeah.
he's creating a positive externality.
No, because if he doesn't keep the money,
Yeah, no, but he's creating a positive.
Oh, positive.
For
He's-
people with like a higher marginal value to.
yeah. So if you think that they have greater marginal utility, yeah, then that's a positive externality. So that's why, like, you know, you would like Robin Hood. That's the idea, you know. I mean, but on the other hand, he's also creating a deterrent to labor, right? And so you have to trade those two off. But if you live in a society where there's like suboptimal amounts of insurance, which presumably feudal England in like, what is it, like the like 12th century or something like that, or 11th century, was presumably a place where like inequality was probably higher than was socially optimal. So if that's the case, then Robin Hood is good. Yeah. Okay. So this distinction shows up pretty heavily in the law. So there's a distinction in the law between the notion of physical damages and pure economic losses. And this really corresponds very closely to the notion of real and pecuniary externalities. So physical damages is like I'm driving my car and I hit a doctor with the car and the doctor dies. And that, you know, is that's a standard externality on that doctor. Or if I burn down my house and that catches fire on other people's houses and burns those down too, that's also a real externality. Or if you defame someone's rightful character with libel and, you know, spread untruths, that's not physical, but it's called like a physical damage, right? Pure economic losses are very different on the other hand. So if I kill that doctor and that causes like the price of getting a doctor in that town to go up, well, that's the harms that does to consumers are going to be offset by the benefits achieved by the other doctors by being able to raise their rates, and that's not an externality. If I burn my house down and that causes the prices of other houses to rise because now there's not as many houses in the neighborhood, that's not a positive externality that action had on other people in the neighborhood because it hurts the people who might buy those houses, right? Now, here's another case. Imagine I burn down my house and that actually causes the prices of other houses in the neighborhood to fall because I had such a beautiful house that was making the neighborhood nice, and now there's like an empty lot there, and therefore the prices of all the houses fall. Victor is not here. Anybody else? Yeah, Dake.
Doesn't that still cause damage to the people who own the houses because all of a sudden they're holding houses that are worth less?
But that sounds like it's mediated through the price system, so is it a real externality?
No, it's not a real externality.
What do other people think? Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an externality because consumer houses would benefit from the drop.
Do they? What do you think, Julian?
I think it is an externality
Yeah.
because there was previously a positive externality.
Yeah.
From the house being beautiful,
Yeah.
raising home prices, and now you removed it.
Exactly. And in addition, what Adam just said is wrong, right? Because the new buyers of the home don't get benefited. The price falls, but the house is less beautiful. And so those offset each other, right? And so you're left with the net harm to the current owners. And Julian's is the explanation of why Adam's is wrong, basically. Okay. So, but on the other hand, if everyone in the neighborhood was paying the guy, like, money for how much he was making the neighborhood better, if he was getting some award from the community for that, then that second effect would be a purely pecuniary externality, because those people, even though they lost the house, they would also lose the tax that they had to pay in order to fund the guy's award for having a nice house, and so they would be the same amount off, right? So, yeah, Christian.
So even like not necessarily creating a new negative externality, but just eliminating an existing positive one?
Those are exactly the same thing. There's no positive, I mean, in economics in general, people often talk about benefit cost analysis, and in fact we will. All that a benefit is a negative cost, and all that a cost is a negative benefit. I mean, you can just move them around on the two sides of the thing, and there's no real distinction between those things. So yeah, from an economics perspective. Okay, so during the Deepwater Horizon disaster, there were a huge amount of issues trying to figure out who actually was owed money and who was not, based on these types of things. So for example, are the shrimping employees who lost their job as a result of the Deepwater Horizon disaster actual victims in the externalities sense of the Deepwater Horizon disaster? Is Mateus here? I don't think he is. No. Anyone else want to opine on that? Yeah, go ahead, Suha.
So I guess no. It's the owner, like the pure economic costs to the owner, and then like through the price, there's a less smaller reduction in demand for.
The shrimping employees, yeah, but except you got the terms reversed. The physical losses to the owner, and the pure economic losses to them. Yeah, that's right. So how about a government conservation agency that has the responsibility for protecting the birds that were killed by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill? Anyone want to take that? Victor's not here, so. Evan.
Wait, was it really Victor again?
Yeah, it's like literally, the thing is with random number generators, there's an extremely high probability that you get a long run of the same person over and over again, and it turns out that it's him and he's not here. So, yeah, Evan, yeah.
So, government conservation agency would be the group that is actually responsible for the birds.
Yeah.
I suppose we could say they have a form of indirect ownership.
Yeah.
So that would mean that there's a physical loss to them.
Yeah. So you can think of those people as being the agents for society's interest in that, right? It's the same way that, like, a business person is the agent for the business. Similarly, these people are like put in charge of taking care of the society's interest in having those birds there. And so they are sort of the owners, effectively, of that interest. Yeah, you want to go on that?
I was just going to ask, would you say that, say you had people whose jobs were catching birds and using them for shows, would we say they have a pecuniary loss?
Well, if they paid the owner, who was like this agency, for the right to, borrow those birds, then that would be a pure pecuniary loss. But if if nobody was like paying attention to the birds and they could just go in and catch them and they weren't paying anything for it and they were getting a benefit out of it, yes, then they would have a loss. So that's the idea. I think that I'm going to move on because I think we need to get through this lecture, but I'll come back. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end and we can answer some more questions. I know these are a lot of like brain teasers. It's sort of like math puzzle, economics versions of math puzzles, but I'm trying to go through a bunch of examples to try to calibrate how you guys think about them. How how about the Louisiana hotel industry that served people who were business people who came to work in the shrimping or seafood industry in the Gulf? Julian, what do you think about that?
No, because they didn't own any other things that were
Yeah.
like directly damaged by the deep Horizon spill.
Yeah, so they might have a reduction in the hotel rates, but they'll still fill those hotels with people who are coming for tourism, because now it'll be really cheap to go on tourism in Louisiana, right? So how about disrupted shippers who used to ship through the port of New Orleans? Is Abhinav here? I don't think he is, right? Anyone else want to take that? Yeah, Philip.
It's a real externality because they pretty much had the right to go through, it was understood that they had the right to go through the water, but now someone messed up the water so they can't go through it anymore.
Yeah, so that's true if they weren't paying anything for the port. But if the port was like owned by someone and someone was charging a market rate for the port, then the crappy quality of the port will cause the price to come down. And they were paying the full benefit anyways, so that's not a real externality at that point.
True.
Yeah, Tanner.
Well, like, I'm not sure if it's true, but
Yeah.
when you go to a port, you have like your, like a company have its own station, you know, where that's their shipping, or it's unloaded. Don't they have like each?
Yeah, so if they have ownership of a station, then they would be an owner. Yeah,
so
that's
they,
right.
Then it would be a real externality.
Yeah.
Because they own something in the
Exactly. Yeah, so it all depends on who. It's always accruing to the owner of the thing which is damaged, rather than to people who are indirectly harmed through the change in the economic environment. That's the thing to keep in mind. So, not everything across people. Yeah, Mike. Yeah.
I have a question about the port question.
Yeah.
What if the port is like already a crappy port or something and the price is low and it's like, for example, they can't lower prices enough to like make up for the externality and still make like running a port sustainable or something like that?
Well, but then there's not any loss because like basically the port wasn't creating much value in the first place, right? Because they weren't able to charge enough to cover their costs.
Okay.
Right? So there's no loss then.
So will changes in prices, like, are there cases in which changes in prices might be insufficient to cover externalities if something's not like a real externality?
As long as the damage can sort of like adjust through the price system and people aren't losing rents. So people could lose rents. Like imagine that I've made an investment in being good at going to this port, right? And I earn some surplus off of that, right? And now, like, it's not just that like the price goes down of the port, but the port suddenly now shuts down as you were describing. But I've made some investment that I was earning surplus off of. Then that would have a real externality on me. So you have to always think about what things could be mediated through the price system or what things might be like a discrete change from which I earn a surplus. But if the guy was perfectly price discriminating and was extracting my surplus, then it wouldn't be a real externality. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It all depends on whether you're earning some like uninternalized rent off of this thing. Dake, yeah.
Wait, so to clarify, physical
Yeah.
damages are actual externalities and pure
Yes,
economic
exactly,
loss are not?
exactly,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so not everything that happens across people is a real externality, but in contrast, not everything that happens within people is actually just fine and efficient. So in fact, there can be externalities within a person, because externality does not mean across people. It means not captured by the price/optimization system. And the price system, remember, is just society's Lagrange multipliers. So if within you, you're not having a Lagrange multiplier that takes into account something that affects you, that can be an externality as well, right? Usually these are called internalities because people didn't understand the source of the name of the word externality. And thought that it was about, but anyways, so we'll call them that too. And policies that address these are usually called paternalism. And these are really based on the same idea that there are things that you do to affect yourself that are not taken into account by the way in which you optimize, just like the market fails to take into account externalities, right? And large areas of policy are to at least some extent determined by these considerations. So for example, addiction and drugs, I think, is to a large extent, the reason why we have drug policy is because we're worried that people might harm themselves in a way that they don't fully or correctly take into account. Forced savings and Social Security are another example of this. People might be tempted not to save, but they would be better off saving. Energy efficiency standards. A lot of people think that people fail to take into account how much money they could save if they got a more efficient car. And in fact, most of what the government uses to justify the fact that it forces companies to have high energy standards is exactly the effect that people will benefit themselves from having lower energy cars, not that they'll benefit the environment. And in fact, it turns out, this is something people don't know, because everyone's like, oh, to save the planet, I should really be having a Prius or whatever. But actually, CAFE standards, by almost any calculation you do, force more fuel economy on cars by far than could be justified by any optimal carbon tax. So like we're already having more fuel efficient cars than you would want to if you were just trying to deal with the externality associated with carbon on the world, which is kind of interesting. So instead, you have to justify these things people are like actually hurting themselves by not taking into account the future price of oil. And there's a little bit of evidence for this. So there's a recent paper by Kunt Alcott and Nathan Wozni, which shows that when the price of oil changes, people don't change their purchases of cars as much as they do in response to price once you've converted the oil price into dollars and so forth. And therefore that like people are probably not fully taking into account the effect of oil, but the effect is much, much smaller, so that even than the CAFE standards require. So even if you add CAFE standards and optimal carbon tax, even if you add this effect plus the optimal carbon tax, still the CAFE standards are way too strict. So it seems unlikely that those are like actually the optimal thing to be doing. Yeah, Philip.
How are we sure that people aren't just thinking that this price increase is transitory?
Because you can look at the futures prices of oil, and those tell you about the future, the changes that they should be expecting about the future of oil.
Okay, so this is taking futures prices of oil as assumed accurate.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, Tanner.
What do they define as optimal? How do they get that figure?
Well, the optimal thing would be if you do the calculation of all the externalities and you take these estimates and then you figure out if we were to put all the optimal taxes on, what would people be doing? Then CAFE standards are much stricter than that. That's the idea. Yeah. I think we need to go on. Sorry. Okay, another example of this is suicide or organ donation or prohibitions on other sorts of markets like prostitution. Most of those are, I think, justified by some sort of negative effect that we think people are choosing to have on themselves. Okay. Now, most economists' favorite response to externalities is taxation. If the externality is harmful, tax the activity. If it's beneficial, subsidize it. And this is a simple solution because it directly creates a price for the relevant activity. Now, the tax has to be set equal to the marginal externality at the optimal level of the activity. So imagine that, so in my example here, the amount that smoking cost people, was constant. But imagine that, as people smoke more, it gets more costly. So the costs look something like this. Well, then what you'd want to add is the amount, the tax that you'd want to impose would be at this level here, not at this level here or at that level there, right? You want to impose the amount of tax that's equal to the optimal, to the marginal externality at the amount that is at the socially optimal amount. So it's not just the marginal social cost anywhere, it's the marginal social cost at the optimum. Because if you don't impose that, you won't get to the optimal quantity. Now, even that is not always going to be sufficient to achieve the socially optimal quantity. So the thing I was trying to point out here is you don't need to just think about, oh, what is the cost? You need to think about what's the cost at the optimal quantity. But in addition to that, even imposing just that marginal externality at the optimal quantity won't always be sufficient to achieve the social optimum. It is in this example, but you can consider another example. So think of fax machines, or Facebook, or any other industry where like it's only valuable to use it if other people are using it, right? And you could say, well, that means that there's an externality on other people when I use this technology, so maybe there should be a subsidy on me using this technology, right? But if you just imposed the benefit to people of having one more person on the network at the optimum, like, what do you think the benefit of like one more person getting onto Facebook is? I don't know, maybe the externality on other people is like some amount, but it's not something huge. The problem is people might not get onto the system even in exchange for that subsidy if they don't think anyone else is on the system, right? And as a result of that, you could have the system, even though it's socially beneficial, and the optimal level is that lots of people use it, no one might get on, right? So you might have to subsidize a lot more than that at the beginning to get people onto the system so that eventually you can get to this optimal level. And in fact, that's what pretty much every internet company does, right? They usually charge these incredibly low prices early on and really do all this stuff to get people to use it in order to spur adoption. And then once the system has developed and people can benefit from other people using it, they lower the prices, right? So sometimes it can be optimal to subsidize much more early on in order to get the thing up to efficient scale, right? And this idea is called the insulating tariff, and it comes from a paper that I wrote a few years ago. So there's the most common application of Pigouvian taxation is to dealing with pollution. So there's a notion that was proposed by Lawrence White called effluent taxation, which is rather than requiring that you have something that cleans up the exhaust from your car to a particular degree, instead he argued that every time your car gets inspected, the local authority that inspects your car should assess a tax that's based on how harmful pollution is in that area. Because out in the middle of rural Nevada, it's not all that harmful to be driving around a polluting car because it just gets dissipated. In New York City, it's really harmful, right? And so you might want to have gradated taxes on that allow people to figure out whether it's worth it to them to buy those things that will reduce the amount of emissions that they're putting out. Yeah, Mitch?
I'm not sure I understand why the tax would necessarily be lower, say, in a rural area where...
Yeah.
Wouldn't you just be creating the same amount of pollution as in New York?
No, but the thing is it doesn't hurt people to create pollution because there's no one to smell the pollution. And there's no one to get sick from it.
A car in New York you don't really see the effect of that either.
No, you do. I mean, so first of all, there's nonlinear things in congestion where actually if you have a little bit, it doesn't bother people's health at all until you get quite a bit. And it is convex like that. So it does, every additional car in New York does a lot more harm. Plus it does more harm to more people. So it's definitely worse. Okay. So his idea was to have all the localities charge different taxes. Now, in France, they have pollution taxes for every factory. And there's a little sensor on the smokestack of every factory, and it measures 100 different chemicals that you let off. And for each one of them, you get charged some tax. People have also advocated having a carbon tax worldwide, and we'll talk a lot more about this on Thursday, but this is used in Europe. Now, economists usually prefer this sort of response to pollution over directly coming into factories and telling them, pollute this much, implement this particular thing. And why is that, Tavish? Why don't economists want you to just be forced to, adopt or not adopt some technology? Why do they want?
Why do they want it to just like for you to be incentivized to use.
Yeah, why do they want you to, like, pay a tax on the externality you cause rather than just have the government come in and say, use this or use that?
If you're able to do it more efficiently, again, there's kind of a comparative advantage if you're able to do it more efficiently yourself just by reducing pollution.
Yeah.
When you do that, otherwise.
The prices allow people to basically trade, right? It allows people who are able to do it more to do more of it, and people who are able to do it less to do less of it. In fact, there was a study recently by Meredith Fowley and her co-authors that showed that because the system wasn't working like this, that we were losing a lot of potential gains. So what she showed is that, like, cars aren't checked for how much nitrous oxide they put out, even though it's a small amount, they put out some, but factories are. So the factories have to pay for it, but they can't pay the car owners to do it instead. And that's really inefficient, because cars, turns out, could get rid of NOx much more cheaply than factories could. And they estimated you could save $2 billion by allowing that trade to take place. Okay. Now in the US, many, if not most, Pigouvian taxes are not collected through the tax system, but through the legal system. So when a firm or an individual causes harm, they get sued, and the court assesses how large the harm was. And the individual causing harm has to pay what are called compensatory damages that directly redress the harms caused, but sometimes they also have to pay punitive damages. And these punitive damages deal with a couple of issues. One is that not everybody who's causing a harmful externality gets caught doing it, and so they multiply up the damages so that on average, given your probability of getting caught, the expected amount of damages you pay is equal to the harm that you caused. But another reason you can pay these punitive damages and not pay them to the person who actually was harmed, but to the government, is that they don't want to give too much incentive to someone who might be able to avoid being harmed to try to get in harm's way just so they can get the damages, right? Or to avoid taking care to avoid the damages just so that they can get these benefits, right? And maybe the current problem set or maybe a past problem set dealt with this, I'm not completely sure. So the Anglo-Saxon legal system really incorporates Pigou's principle into it. And everyone always talks about how litigious we are in the United States, how there's all these lawsuits and it drives people crazy. But in Europe, where they have many less lawsuits, the reason is that they have much more direct controls over people's behavior. So in Anglo-Saxon system, because we're so free market, we choose to incorporate these things by using lawsuits and a more Pigouvian process. In Europe, they more directly control people's behavior because they believe more in a regulatory interventionist state, right? Now, in most of these lawsuits, people end up actually negotiating, and that's what determines the payment, but it's in the shadow of the legal system tying it down. Yeah, Christian?
What's the PIA?
Payment in accordance with product. Yeah. Yes, Sue-Al?
How could you file a lawsuit unless there was already a law or regulation preventing activity?
Oh, that's the common law. So most of the law in the Anglo-Saxon system is not based on statutes that exist. In other countries it is, but in the Anglo-Saxon system, most of law comes from tradition. So that's what the common law means. Civil law systems are ones where everything is written down in the law. Yeah, good point. I think we're going to keep going. Okay, so instead of just putting a tax, we might want to put a maximum amount on how much of the activity takes place, and then allow people to trade the right to do that, right? So you could put a maximum amount of pollution that's allowed, and then auction or assign rights to people. Or if it's a positive externality, you could say that if you don't have a permit, then you have to do the thing, right? And that's a way of creating a positive price for doing the thing. So returning to the smoking example, Pigou would want to put a tax of $90 per cigarette. But alternatively, you could cap the total number of cigarettes at 55,000. And that would make the supply of cigarettes completely inelastic at 55,000, and therefore the price of obtaining a permit would be exactly 90 cents, right? Sorry, I already answered this. So then the price would rise to $1.90 in order to clear the market, and that would give you exactly the same thing as what would happen with a tax, right? So capping at the optimal quantity is equivalent to putting taxes. And this is true because of the definition of market optimality, right? Forcing things to be the optimal quantity will lead the optimal price to occur, right? So this is commonly proposed for pollution. Allowing people to trade creates a price, and capping the total amount of pollution creates a price for pollution. And if it's set at the efficient level, this is the same as the tax, and it's equivalent for most intensive purposes. The easiest way to think about this is imagine we had an auction for the pollution permit, right? Then the price in that auction of the permits would be exactly the tax. And that would raise the same amount of revenue for the government. Everything would be exactly the same, right? But it's often proposed that instead of having a tax, that instead we use these permits. And it's not that we're going to hold an auction where it really would be almost equivalent. Instead, the reason is people want to give out the permits to people who are their political supporters, right? So, and this seems a lot more politically palatable than raising a tax and then giving out money to people, right? Because it's sort of hidden, the fact that you're giving out money to people. You could have auctioned the thing, or you could have put the tax. But if you put the tax, then you wouldn't be able politically to give money back to the industry to buy its support for the tax. Whereas if you give them out permits, people said, oh, that's fair, they were just polluting anyways, even though those are exactly the same thing, right? Putting this aside, though, is there an economic logic that might favor doing one thing or the other? Can you think of one, Maury?
I guess that way puts it more like in the hands of prices rather than like a centralized thing. So you don't really need too much information, too much centralized information. You just need to know prices.
Well, so it certainly impacts that, but remember that here, in order to figure out the right price, we need to know what the optimal quantity was to figure out the marginal value at the optimal thing. So if we knew exactly what the marginal value was, well, then you're right. But what if we don't know that? What if we know exactly what the total amount beyond which the world blows up is, right? Then you would clearly want to put a quantity, right? You wouldn't want to put a price because it would require a lot more information to get the price, right? And so let's go through an analysis of that, right? The basic problem is we might not know exactly what the demand is for the thing, and like once we set the price or the quantity, that's going to be locked in for a while before we see what happens in the market, right? That's exactly the logic you were talking about, right? Now, if the marginal cost is very elastic, if we basically know what the price should be, if we know what the value is, then we should impose a price, right? But on the other hand, imagine that also if the marginal cost of people not doing the thing is very steep, right? So imagine that the market absolutely has to do a certain amount. We don't know exactly what that amount is, but if they do any little bit less or a little bit more, it's going to be a total disaster for them. It's going to cost them a huge amount. Well, then you really wouldn't want to put a cap on it, right? Because then you're going to cause a huge distortion in what the market does. In that case, you want to use a tax, and that's the case of sort of a local externality. So, for example, something like smoking, it only affects the people right around you. It doesn't add up over the whole planet. So it would be crazy to put a cap on the amount of smoking, because it could be really costly to people to do it, to get off smoking. You don't really know exactly how hard it is for people to get off smoking. And on the other hand, it's not like it's adding up over the whole world and going to reach some tipping point, right? You basically know how much harm it's causing to people. And that's why most local externalities use the tort system or the legal system, is that they're not things that are adding up over the whole country, so it doesn't make sense to cap it. You just take the harm and you make people pay for that. On the other hand, if the optimal quantity of something is basically independent of how much people want to do it, because if we do even a little bit more than something, the whole world is going to blow up, right? Then we clearly want to put a cap on it. Or if the amount that it costs people to stop doing the thing is pretty much constant, then there's not too much waste if we set the quantity slightly wrong, right? It's not like it's going to get incredibly costly incredibly quickly. And so as a result, in those cases, we're going to want to put a cap. So what are examples of that? Well, if you think of congestion on a road, right? If you get even slightly past a certain point, like the chance of the road really slowing down is much, 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 much higher. So it makes a lot more sense to put like a cap on the total number of people who can be on a road, or like the cap on the total number of people who can be in a cinema at one time, rather than just having a price for tickets that clears the market for the cinema, right? Like think if you were a cinema, you would never just say like, no, you don't sell out of the cinema. The price just gets really high, and then you have to like pay for standing in the cinema, right? I mean, clearly it gets really congested beyond that point, and it's harmful, right? And similarly, for lead in gasoline, like the amount that it costs you to take the lead out of your gasoline is pretty much totally constant across people, right? Doesn't vary at all. It's just given by whatever the cost of taking the lead out was. On the other hand, it can accumulate in the environment and make things worse. And so if the optimal quantity we sort of know is 0, you just legislate that, and you don't have a tax. So to give you a picture of this, here is a case where, imagine this is the marginal private benefit, and this is the marginal social cost. Here the marginal social cost is pretty flat. The marginal private benefit is very steep. If we impose a price, we only get a little distortion, which are these little triangles between the price and the true social benefit, right? And so, actually, that's not the right triangle. The right triangle is this one here, but it's still pretty small. Oh, no. No, that is right. That is right. Okay. So, on the other hand, if we impose a quantity control, right, then we get a huge loss, which are these big triangles here, because we're moving way away from what would be socially optimal, which would be over here, right? On the other hand, if the marginal private value is pretty flat and the marginal social cost is really steep, if we impose a price control, you see we get pretty far from what we should be doing, which are these points here, right? But if we impose a quantity control, we get pretty close, and therefore we get small triangles and large triangles on the price control. Yes,
So those dotted lines are like representing the uncertainty?
Yeah, it's the uncertainty of what might be the demand. Exactly. Okay, so, however, all of these are basically like government-led public solutions to these problems. And a natural question is there some way that the private sector could solve these problems on its own, right? And one argument is that if property rights are clear, then people will always bargain to efficiency. So for example, imagine that there's just an issue between you and your neighbor, right? And imagine that your neighbor makes a lot of noise at night, and that you can't sleep as a result. Now the optimum might be for like you to make some intermediate amount, your neighbor to make some small amount of noise that lets you sleep but lets them enjoy themselves, right? And if either of you has property rights, you'll basically figure this out. So imagine he has the right to make as much noise as he wants. That's his absolute right. Well, you could come in and pay him and say, well, look, it doesn't cost you that much to reduce the amount of noise a little bit. It's really valuable to me. Let me make you a payment. On the other hand, if he has the right, if you have the right to have everything be absolutely quiet, he could say, okay, I understand that's your right, but let me give you a little payment in order to allow me to make some noise, right? You can sell him the right to make some noise. Either way, you'll achieve an efficient bargain, and basically you'll come to the same bargain regardless of who has the right, right? So this has been used to argue that we shouldn't do anything about externalities. We should just let them solve themselves. We should give people the rights to various things, and that will take care of it. And this logic is called Stigler's Coase theorem, or the Coase theorem, or Coase's theorem. It says that if there's no transaction costs in inhibiting bargaining, then efficiency always results. And if the income effects are small, if it's a small part of your income, then the outcome is independent of the assignment of property rights. I'm going to be talking about, Philip, what's your question?
Hold on, I'm just wondering about the assumption, if there are any other assumptions on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to talk a bunch about this, so yeah. So the real question is, what is a transaction cost of bargaining? Does anyone have a thought? And Philip, do you want to address that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would just be like, if you need to spend time negotiating and you would rather
Yeah.
use the time for working for money
Yeah.
or leisure.
Yeah. So that's one thing, but also if you don't know perfectly what the bargain should be, if one of you knows and the other doesn't know, then you might have some trouble figuring it out. I mean, basically anything that impedes efficiency is a transaction cost. So really this is just a tautology. It says if there's nothing impeding efficiency, then efficiency results, right? So another way of putting this is all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds, right? Nonetheless, I think this can be a useful way to think about some things in some cases. Yeah, Christian?
Real quick, so
Yeah.
like, if property rights weren't clearly defined, that would be a transaction cost?
Not really.
Because
Not really, because the thing is, like, there's always going to be some de facto property right, which is basically what will happen absent violence in the situation. You know what I mean? Like, even if it's not clear who has the right to do what, like, you're going to have something which is going to be like what will happen in the absence of some agreement, and you just bargain away from that.
So the state of war is still efficient.
Well, I mean, this is one problem with the Coase theorem, right? Is like, you know, war should never happen according to the Coase theorem. Because there's always something that will happen, and we should always bargain to the efficient peace treaty from any state of war, right? Okay, so bargaining works well when there's a small number of people, right, who have all the relevant information and who can find one another, right? And in particular, bargaining is often facilitated by a long-term relationship that facilitates us knowing each other, knowing the information we have, and so forth. So for example, this also often happens through some sort of a merger. So like a condominium association is set up to help people like bargain over what's going on with the condo, and these people have known each other for a long time. They know who each other are. They know what their interests are. That may allow them to bargain more easily. Company towns like Hyde Park. Hyde Park has relationships with like Mac Properties and with everybody else in the neighborhood, and sort of can more easily bargain as a result. Cooperative firms are thought to do this. So like if they have a relatively small number of workers, they and the workers and the consumers, can all sort of know each other, bargain with each other, etc. European Union, some people have argued, does this. It allows for bargaining between people, within the union. They sort of know each other, know their interests, and they can hopefully bargain to efficient outcomes. Of course, some things don't always work. Lots of those examples have lots of imperfections. And there's always still internalities as well, right? Also, it's not good if you use a system like this to internalize a pecuniary externality. Because if you internalize a pecuniary externality that's not a real externality, you actually cause real externalities. So for example, if you have a merger of two competing firms, we said usually firms' competition with each other doesn't create a real externality, it only creates a pecuniary externality, right? And if they merge, they're going to internalize that pecuniary externality, and that creates a real externality of market power against consumers. An industry-wide lobbying group is another example of that. You might think that lobbying group is internalizing pecuniary externalities on each other because when they lobby, it hurts whoever has to pay the bills for whatever subsidies they're getting, right? Another example of this is like the pack of mean girls or popular girls at a high school, right? They might all be conspiring in the dating market to sort of like exert market power. And they're internalizing a pecuniary externality in the example we gave before, right? Rather than a real externality. Okay, so monopolistic, sometimes the private sector can at least partially internalize externalities through monopolies. And this is often what happens with the provision of network goods. So for example, in the fax industry, if one firm knew that it would control the fax industry forever, it might have an incentive to give those subsidies I was talking about early on, because it would know that if the market developed, they would be able to cash in on that, right? So like, for example, newspapers are often offered free to consumers to internalize the externality that consumers reading the newspaper has on the people that advertise it, right? And this is often useful in the short run, especially if the monopolist has a really good sense of whether the market should be created or not, of what the externalities are potentially at the equilibrium. And it may be worth giving the monopolist the right to do that if he has that insight into what the demand patterns really are. But in the long run, this can't lower overall price, right? Because the monopolist wants to make a profit. And he'll never be willing to do it below cost. So a competitive market will often produce at average cost. And therefore, in the long run, the monopoly will supply less, even though it can be useful to get over the hump to give someone a monopoly. Because they might know whether it's worth doing that or not. Okay, so despite the potential benefits that bargaining can bring and the possibilities of some of these private solutions, I mostly think the Coase theorem is misleading. And does anyone want to raise some reasons why this idea that just leave it to the market is the right response doesn't make a lot of sense? Yeah, Austin.
Because there are pretty much always transaction costs as well as other impediments to bargaining.
Yeah, that's an important reason. Anyone? There's sort of like a complementary part of that. Yeah, Adam.
Well, one thing is the assumption of no income effects.
Well, let's put that aside for the moment, because we're going to put that aside. Yeah.
Also, like the whole idea of information, that both sides need information on what would be the...
But that's sort of part of the transaction cost. Does anyone else have a... Yeah, Julian?
Well, I guess this is also part of transaction cost, but if there's a lot of different people who are hurt by the externality, then all of them can't. It's going to be really costly for all of them to individually bargain. There's not really any...
Yeah, so externalities are sort of by their nature things where lots of people are harmed. That's precisely what usually causes externalities. And in those cases, it's going to be particularly hard to bargain. Yeah, but Dave, do you have another thought?
Well, if you have high transaction costs, a lot of bargaining simply won't happen. So these externalities...
That's similar to what Austin said. Does anyone else have a different thing? Yeah, Mike.
You don't know for sure that every possible bargaining solution will be addressed, and you also don't know for sure that whatever preferences people in the bargain reveal are the ones that they actually want. So there could be information.
Yeah, so that's an informational issue, which is sort of a part of this. Yeah, Philip?
It might, knowing that this kind of bargaining is going to eventually occur, might create very poor incentives. Maybe someone will turn the music up louder than he actually wants it, just so he can extract more payment for getting.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. I think the most basic thing, though, is that how can it hurt? Right? How can the government intervention hurt? If people are going to bargain to efficiency no matter where the property rights are, if any of these issues matter, well, then it's going to be beneficial to correct the externality. And if none of these issues matter, then who cares, right? You'll always get to efficiency anyways, right? So it's like it seems completely stupid to say, well, there's a case where nothing matters at all, and let's base policy on that case, because in that case, any policy is as good as any other policy, right? So you've got to base policy on the case where things don't work perfectly, because that's the only case where it matters what you do, right? So the Coase theorem really says nothing against intervention, just like the first fundamental welfare theorem says nothing against socialism, right? So the real externality problem is a problem of information, right? And this is going to be the theme of our next class. The key issue is that information is about these externalities is often either diffused among lots of different people because lots of different people are hurt, in which case it's going to be very hard to get all those people together to bargain, or it's something that's much more accessible to an outside expert who can assess things like what are the effects of acid rain coming from the climate, et cetera, et cetera. And those are people who aren't parties to the problem, right? So most of these externality things are where the parties don't understand the mechanism of the externality or where the effects are diffused. And in both of those cases, the parties bargaining are not going to have the relevant information, right? And, or it's going to be very hard for them to all get together, right? And the key issue in externality design is how to combine this information coming from expertise that's outside of the people in the thing, and how to aggregate the information of lots of different diffuse people. And that's what the next class is going to be about. How do we deal with those problems? Because we know that the market deals well with problems when you don't have these outside experts and you don't have the the problem of so many different people all being affected by things. And simplistic answers like the Coase theorem do a good job of explaining why markets work, and they do a very poor job in these cases where we know markets can't work because it's important to get these centralized information or to aggregate information from large numbers of people. And the next class is going to sort of gird you against that sort of naive response and try to get you to think in a more detailed way about how to set up these systems. Now we have a few extra minutes. There was tons of questions earlier. I don't know if anyone wants to ask a question now. Yeah, Austin.
So, like, with the Coase theorem, does things like social taboos fit into the whole transaction cost, or is that a separate thing? Like, organ donation, you can come up with all sorts of,
Well, I think it fits in only if there's a way that the government can solve that better. So I think sometimes there is a way that the government can solve that better because of information problems. So, like, let me give you an example. Remember we talked about the case that I thought, like, in a lot of medical innovation, you get, stuck in this thing with, your dying parents who think that if you don't force them to stay alive, that you don't love them. Well, the government coming in and just putting in death panels can solve that, because now you have no choice, right? And there was this information problem before where your parents didn't know whether you loved them or not. You see what I mean? And that's this, like, when there's an information problem like that, some intervention by the government can potentially solve that. Anybody else? Dake, yeah.
Can we go back like one or two slides?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here. What exactly does it mean to internalize externalities to? Could you go through that example again, I think?
Yeah, so imagine that, like, imagine that no one could make profits off of newspapers. Then it would be very hard, like, no one would give newspapers away for free because they would all be charged the price that it costs to print them, right? But because people can make profits off of the advertisers, they have an incentive to give them away free to consumers, and that might be better because there might be externalities to advertisers of having consumers read the newspaper and therefore see the ads. And like the market power, the monopoly that the newspaper can have over that newspaper actually gets them to internalize that externality, maybe even charge less to the consumers than a market would. You see what I mean?
When you say internalize, it means it takes into account that externality?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is an earlier question when you were talking about basically multiplying damages caused by a particular action by the probability of hitting it.
Yeah.
Doesn't that basically just encourage people to be good criminals? Like, if you're above average, you still have a net positive return to...
No, you don't multiply it, you divide it.
Divide it?
So, in other words, like, you divide it by the probability of getting caught.
Right.
Because that makes you, if you're a good criminal, if there's like a reason to believe that you would have been unlikely to get caught, then you have to pay a huge cost conditional on getting caught.
So I'm thinking about, like, the fines that the government's been putting on banks for, like, money laundering and stuff recently.
Yeah, so if it's hard to catch the thing, if the government thinks, like, we caught this, but it was sort of really difficult to catch it, then you have to pay a much bigger multiple of how much damage you actually caused. That's the idea. So it's exactly to discourage people from being good criminals. Yeah.
So for the oil spill slide, you mentioned that, like, physical damages are the actual externalities. So does that mean the people who face, like, a pure economic loss shouldn't get compensated?
That's the idea in the common law, yeah. And the reason is that the common law, even though it comes out of, years of developing and intuitions and whatever, actually deals with these principles of social optimality, at least one hopes. And there's a whole literature on how the common law developed that way. Philip, yeah.
In the paper about the car efficiency standards, how did they estimate the discount rate of a representative consumer?
It's very complicated.
Okay.
I mean, they used, there's all sorts of assumptions that they made in that paper to get all that stuff out. You'll find in most economics papers, when they come out with some, like, sharp conclusion like that, usually there's like a million things that they had to assume or take values from other places and so forth to come up with that. And you'll have to do that too if you want to have a thesis. that comes out with a sexy conclusion like that. So usually you can only do something very, very sort of like not interesting if you just go with the data directly. And to get more sexy conclusions like this, you need to make further, stronger assumptions. So, okay, guys, thanks. I hope the problem set was okay.